Welcome. Hello, welcome. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Kelly Writers House. Welcome to Tender Buttons at 100. I'm Julia Block, and I'm thrilled to be one of the people welcoming you to this event tonight. I cannot believe it's been 100 years since this book was published. It seems like just yesterday. So if you haven't been to the Writers House before, welcome. All of our programs are free and open to the public. And if you'd like to hear more about what goes on here, please sign our guest book out in the vestibule. If you're returning to us, welcome back. I am going to turn it over really quickly to Lainey Brown, who's going to be saying a little bit more about the folks speaking this evening, but I'll just make three very quick announcements. Four very quick announcements. Okay, so number one, after the reading, we will be retiring to the dining room for a lovely reception, at which point you can also buy special edition broadsides. You can actually have them for free. You do not need to purchase them. They will be available for free. Allie Katz is holding them up in the back. They look gorgeous. A red stamp. You can also purchase copies of the new City Lights edition of Tender Buttons for the incredible low price of $5, which is pretty amazing. So please do so. I said I had four announcements. The next announcement is that very soon at jacket2.org, we're going to be publishing a number of micro reviews of Tender Buttons, both the current new Centennial edition and also just the poems as they have been existing over the last 100 years. And that feature of micro reviews is going to include contributors, among whom are all of the presenters for tonight. So very excited to include those at Jacket 2. So I'm going to turn it over to Lainey Brown and say welcome, Lainey, and thank you for helping me imagine this event.
Welcome everybody to the 100th anniversary celebration of Tender Buttons. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you to Julia for organizing this with me and Jessica and every wonderful person at Kelly Writers House who helped make this possible, and to our readers tonight. So the way the evening will proceed is that I'm going to speak first, and then I'm going to introduce all the readers that will follow. So to open the program, I wanted to begin with the very beginning of the text, Tender Buttons, from the section titled Objects. A carafe, that is, a blind glass. A kind in glass, and a cousin, a spectacle, and nothing strange, a single hurt color, and an arrangement in a system to pointing. All this and not ordinary, not unordered in not resembling. The difference is spreading. My first memory of Tender Buttons, the text, is being told that I had been influenced by Gertrude Stein before I had read much Stein. At the time, I wondered, how could it be that I'm influenced by texts I barely know? But now the idea seems perfectly obvious that we're permeated by iconic texts which suffuse a cultural landscape and offer permission for future innovators, whether or not we are aware that this is occurring. Tender or currency is in the air. Once we know, we look more closely. Tender Buttons invites us to look at a book as a possible diagram of the roving, relational identities of words, unfixed arrangements, a carafe, word vessels which pour. Begun in 1912 in Spain and completed and published in 1914 in a modest edition of 1,000 copies, this text has become, among many things, a text about influence. In the new Centennial edition out from City Lights, we find a collation of older editions and the inclusion of some facsimile pages, along with a stirring afterword by poet Juliana Spar, who points to the rooms of Tender Buttons as nationless, and considers the text revolutionary in terms of aesthetics, not political conventions. She asks, is the Room of Tender Buttons a refuge from the complications of this street, or is the room fractured and torn apart and intruded upon by the street? One might also consider her question as a way to ask, where is the influence of origin? How do words influence words? When is a word an object and when is it alive? The question, what is the influence of one word upon another or a series of words upon a reader, is only one of multiple narratives which surrounds Tender Buttons, a text which remains in many ways still mysterious after 100 years. Stein's titles or subheadings, objects, food, and rooms, which originally were the only titles for this work, call into question a conventional assumed distance between definition and meaning, animate and inanimate, thing and description, any objects and its uses or associations. Tender Buttons refuses to be a text which proceeds by what we might call a familiar grammar. Quote, all this and not ordinary, not unordered, and not resembling. Stein's texts often don't resemble her titles, but they do converse obliquely. The difference is spreading. What is the purpose of an object? In Stein, certainly not to be objective. Certainly a word is also an object. An objection is a subject. You may object within this text, which celebrates as it rearranges the notion of written convention, which may exist to be ruined, flaunted, or remade as a ceremony, undressing expectation. What is a word garment? And what is the purpose of purposefulness? Influence in Stein means not only can a writer influence a reader through an arrangement of words on a page, but also a writer may influence words themselves, presenting layer upon layer of word mongering as a spectacle for the reader. We hear the unwritten as well as the written text, how we expect word associations to exist and how else they might move. In this way, Stein's influence is a penetration into language, a gaze into the typically and habitually ignored. Language in Stein becomes a mentor to meaning, which can be bent. Tender Buttons reminds us that language is a raw material with substance and weight, yet not static, and that the only thing fixed may be ideas we bring to the page. So, unstuck, we become unmired and mucked up in language, which will do as it pleases. Tender Buttons is, every time one returns to the page, a potent reminder of the pleasure of this medium of letters, and a text in which a language itself is actor, thing, medium, and decider and originator of grammar or influence. It departs, disorients as a method instead of describing. Quote, a kind in glass and a cousin. Aren't all words cousins in a system to not pointing? Tonight, we're going to have the pleasure of listening to this text read aloud and discussed by several wonderful writers. And now I'm going to provide a very brief introduction to each writer, and then they will read in the order in which I've introduced them, which is the order in which the text Tender Buttons proceeds. So I began with the very beginning, and readers may move around a little bit in their selections, but generally we're following the course of the text as we go along. These writers need no introduction, but please seek out their work. And I'll say in Stein's words, our readers tonight are all this and not ordinary. So our first reader, Leanne Brown, is the author of In the Laurels Caught, Crowns of Charlotte, The Sleep That Changed Everything, and Polyverse. She's founder and editor of Tender Buttons Press, which is dedicated to publishing experimental women's poetry. She teaches at St. John's University, curates poetry page, poetry parlor, and directs the French Broad Institute of Time and the River. Angela Carr is a poet and translator. She's the author of 3 poetry books, most recently Here and There. Originally from Montreal, Angela lives in New York and teaches creative writing at the New School. Next will be Rachel Blau du Plessis, whose work includes the last volume of Drafts, Surge, Drafts 94 to 114, and a new volume of poetry, Interstices, and the critical book, Purple Passages, Pound, Elliot, Zukowski, and the Ends of Patriarchal Poetry. Ryan Eckes is the author of Value Plus, Old News and Other Books. Recent poetry can be read in Sugar Mule, The Rumpus, on and on screen and on his blog. Jason Mitchell's poems have appeared in High Zero, Stolen Island, Court Green, Jupiter 88, and elsewhere. He hosts and coordinates the Philadelphia reading series Frank O'Hara's Last Lover in the Rose Room at Snocky's Oyster and Crab House. Juliette Lee's books include That Gorgeous Feeling, Underground National, and forthcoming Solar Maximum. A 2013 Pew Fellow in the Arts, she writes for The Constant Critic and edits Corollary Press. And Charles Bernstein will finish our evening reading from his contribution to Stein, the forthcoming Cambridge History of Modernist Poetry. His most recent book is Recalculating, and he is the Donald T. Regan Professor of English and Comparative Literature at Penn. So please help me in giving a warm welcome to all of our wonderful readers.
Thank you, Lainey. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I like your sentence, once we know, we look more closely. That's what I'm going to try to do with Glazed Glitter. And I dedicate this reading tonight to my relative youngster, my cousin Gloria Holmes Long, who's 90 years old today, down in Southern Pines. She inspired me to be an interior designer, so that's very appropriate with all this objects, rooms, and food. Glazed Glitter. Nickel. What is nickel? It is originally rid of a cover. The change in that is that red weakens an hour. The change has come. There is no search, but there is that hope and that interpretation. And sometime, surely, any S is welcome, is unwelcome. Sometime there is breath and there will be a sinecure. And charming, very charming, is that clean and cleansing? Certainly glittering is handsome and convincing. There is no gratitude in mercy and in medicine. There can be breakages in Japanese. That is no program. That is no color chosen. It was chosen yesterday that showed spitting and perhaps washing and polishing. It certainly showed no obligation. And perhaps if borrowing is not natural, there is some use in giving. When I try to describe the radical description of the poem that is tender buttons to others, I say, abstract portraits exploded out from everyday objects, much as Picasso unfolded still lives visually. But here words are the art material. Those words found on Alice B. Toklas's shopping list, or on the side table, or behind the door. Usually cite the categories of objects, rooms, food, and offer up examples such as roast beef, an umbrella, or roast potatoes 4, to illustrate what I mean by the concrete domestic objects and food in rooms seen anew, made strange, made pleasurable. Glazed glitter always puzzles me. What is glazed glitter? Where did Gertrude and Alice keep their glazed glitter? If it's actually glitter, it's more of an art material in itself than any of the other entries. Or maybe it's actually one of the tenderest buttons of all, the hardest button to button. The GL glissando glides to the harder, longer sounding azed, hazy, lazy, glazed, amaze, amazing, and then the shorter I, itter. It's an itter. It its itself. I don't want to suggest one tender button poem is harder or brighter or more productive of meaning when teased and squeezed, since the consistency of that malleable quality is remarkably sustained throughout the whole work. But glazed glitter, buttons, but glazed glitter. Sorry. I did not get the butt part for a long time. My daughter was like, tender butt on. So I was like, oh, okay. Anyway, Glazed glitter on its surface seems less penetrable for meanings, the shiny surface of glitter being that flash and filigree of reflection and dispersion of light. And that's what's between each piece of the collective multiple noun of glitter. On whatever surface or face it's infinitesimally is scattered on. The nature of glitter to glide onto whatever it's tossed onto, getting into all its crevices and making it shine. Literally littering a surface, glittering with the opposite of litter. A decoration, an enchanting enhancement, a celebration, back to the lit in glit. What about the French word for bed, lit, L-I-T? To an American, it would be read lit. Lit, one of those French words that could be mistraductioned, be farther afield than that's what Tinder buttons do. Atomized way off into space, the difference is spreading, as we heard from the entry before. Then lire, to read, lire in French, to play, to read aloud, read out, read together, to study. That's what we're doing tonight. A multiplicity as in a litter of kittens, or a production of many, many small poems, the whole book. Littering, glittering, as a little different, yet in the same family. Litter, a queen is borne up on her litter. And what does Gertrude Stein study in a passionate and playful way? She, the one who wrote a poem that says poetry is eternally addressing and caressing a noun. One of those nouns here is the one which rhymes with glitter, the most precious object of affection in the house. Can you guess? The jewel you pay attention to. The object of all this is, as what Julie Patton said to me once, cliterature. The clitoris in the literature, to glitter, to glit her, to clit her, in the French bed called the lit. The sheets strewn, littered with pleasure, glazed glitter, crazy clutter. The etymology of clitoris is said to be jewel. Here the jewels are multiplicitous and spreading everywhere. The difference is spreading. Now I can finally go back to the food part. What is glazing and cooking? A simple sugared solution, drizzled and draped down a cake or a savory meat. Honey baked ham, as we say in the South. The sexual metaphor lovingly extends itself. Glazed glitter. Glazing is also lazing. A glazed over look of sexual excitement or haze of satisfaction. It's even here in Philly in this giant pot of pink glitter in my purse. You can have some out on the porch later that C.A. Conrad gave to me as a housewarming present. I locate also in the local literary scene, glitter pony, gigantic sequins, the cross gender of glitter. But I digress. Yes, I associate. That's why I'm at home in Tinder Buttons. Never ceases to unfold, and I haven't even gotten past the title to the rest of the poem yet, and I'm out of time. I'll briefly mention two things. Sinecure in the poem, a position requiring little or no work, but giving the holder status. Easy job, cushy job, soft option, picnic, cinch, easy money, free ride, gravy train, sinecure. In the poem, I hear this is descriptive of the recipient position, the jewel bearer, how can I say it, the receiver of the glazed job. It fits with this phrase, nickel. What is nickel? It is originally rid of a cover, yes. We are born with glittering clitorises uncovered, and yes, sometimes there is breath and there will be a sinecure, and charming, very charming, is that clean and cleansing. A woman like a cat laps with her tongue over and over, very clean and cleansing, yes. There is some use in giving and certainly makes one handsome and convincing. Okay. On Tinder Buttons or Tind Her Buttons, what buttons do we have? Before I close, I want to briefly mention the anniversary of my press, Tinder Buttons Press, which is named in honor of Stein's Tinder Buttons. Yay. Yay. I realized I've been doing it half my life. I started when I was 25 years old, and I'm 50 now. So started in 1989, exactly 25 years ago. The press itself eternally addresses and caresses and creates the nouns of books, objects of some women, word artists experimenting in today's realms of serious play. I think of the books that we produce as Tinder Buttons that bear eternally unfolding in time and space with multiple active readings, much as quote, single tender buttons can do, and do, and I refer to the authors themselves as tender buttons. I want to end by reading just one of the most tenderest buttons that I have published, in that it unfolds most closely to Stein's Tender Buttons trajectory from Harriet Mullen's Trimmings, which grew from her response to Stein's petticoat poem, evokes Manet's painting Olympia, and written to include the language play of race, and each of which I find as pleasurable and productive to read as Stein's Tender Buttons. And I'll end with this and then a little mention. A light, white, disgraceful sugar looks pink, wears an air, pale compared to shadows standing by. To plump recliner, named truth lies. Behind her shadow wears her color, arms full of flowers. A rosy charm is pink, and she is ink. The mistress wears no petticoat or leaves. The other in shadow, a large pink dress. So that's Harriet Mullen Trimmings. And so I'll give you, again, in addition to what Julia said about getting the book from City Lights, the new edition, the broadside, other ways to celebrate the anniversary is there's a Theater for the New City all month, starting this weekend. They're staging all of Tender Buttons, and Objects is this weekend, the Rooms the next, and then food. I'm going Friday night. If you're in New York City, come to the Theater for the New City for Tender Buttons by the Van Riepen Collective. And we have a big 25th birthday bash at the Poetry Project for Tender Buttons Press, and we launched our first ever website today, tenderbuttonspress.com. Thank you.
I love that glitterous. That was awesome. I'm going to read Substance in a Cushion, and I'm going to make a few remarks. This is one of the longer ones, so a few preliminary remarks. I read A Substance in a Cushion as a sexy and humorous love poem that plays on a little calamity and a little calm in the closet. Its sweetness and its resolution are very likely embodied in the same hand that does the sewing. Let's start at the beginning. The title of the poem gestures inward with the preposition in. The substance is in a cushion, not on a cushion, not under a cushion, not of a cushion. There is no top or bottom to this substance. Is it unbounded? Is it uniform? Is it limitless? Does it belong to the cushion? What exactly is a substance in a cushion? I imagine it's soft, not hard or callous. It's not covering or worn. Also, it is substantial. It's the essential material of the cushion. It is what lies beneath everything seen and touched. But is it unseen? Is it untouched? Is it different from what is seen or touched? The callus, which is the hard covering of the skin, is also skin. The cover, which is the soft covering of cushion fabric, is also fabric. The interior is on a continuum with the exterior. Every tenderness points outward. Every substance in a cushion manifests the exterior as well, although it appears as a difference. Every inner feeling is outwardly touched and tender. Even buttons are tender. Every tender substance and every tender presence is vulnerable or cared for. The prepositions in this poem are an obsession with in and under, with what is hidden. They point to the closet. The nouns, on the other hand, point to what is seen. Stein's language evokes sex. Quote, what is the use of a violent kind of delightfulness if there is no pleasure in not getting tired of it? This is sweet as well. There's a little groan grinding and singing, trimming a red thing. Does all this take place in the closet, under the covers? A closet does not connect under the bed. How does this image work? What does the verb connect do without its usual preposition? The closet could connect to what? And why is the closet under the bed? Why is it not in the bed, behind the bed, on the bed? Is it a substance of the bed? Is the closet a substance of the bed? The theme of the bed is the closet, but the closet is substantive. It is shaded, it is empty, it appears as a dash, not quite connecting. It is named in the negative, not connecting, compelling an affirmation. Could it connect if it were not under? It is a possibility, but not the least bit in action. Another negation appears in the sentence. What is the use of a violent kind of delightfulness if there is no pleasure in not getting tired of it? The inside of the closet is clothing hanging, maybe sashes hanging. The inside of the bed is its substance, like a cushion. There is little differentiation in the cushion, more in the closet, perhaps. One more question. Stein suggests a possible interest in girls and men in equal numbers. And I wonder, why not men and women? Why not boys and women? Why are girls in this perpetual tenderness, not even more hurt than that? Okay, a substance in a cushion. The change of color is likely, and a difference, a very little difference, is prepared. Sugar is not a vegetable. Callus is something that hardening leaves behind what will be soft if there is genuine interest in their being present as many girls as men. Does this change? It shows that dirt is clean when there is a volume. A cushion has that cover. Supposing you do not like to change, supposing it is very clear that there is no change in appearance, supposing there is regularity and a costume, is that any the worse an oyster and an exchange? Come to season. That is there any extreme use in feathers and cotton? Is there not more joy in a table and more chairs and very likely roundness and a place to put them? A circle of fine cardboard and a chance to see a tassel. What is the use of a violent kind of delightfulness if there is no pleasure in not getting tired of it? The question does not come before the quotation. There is a quotation. In any kind of place, there is a top to covering, and it is a pleasure. At any rate, there is some venturing in refusing to believe nonsense. It shows what use there is in a whole piece if one uses it, and it is extreme and very likely the little things could be dearer, but in any case, there is a bargain. And if there is, the best thing to do is to take it away and wear it, and then be reckless, and resolved on returning gratitude. Light blue and the same red with purple makes a change. It shows that there is no mistake. Any pink shows that, and very likely it is reasonable. Very likely there should not be a finer fancy present. Some increase means a calamity, and this is the best preparation for three and more being together. A little calm is so ordinary, and in any case there is sweetness, and some of that. A seal and matches, and a swan and ivy, and a suit. A closet. A closet does not connect under the bed. The band, if it is white and black, the band has a green string. A sight, a whole sight, and a little groan grinding makes the trimming, and such a sweet singing trimming, and a red thing, not a round thing, but a white thing, a red thing and a white thing. The disgrace is not in carelessness, nor even in sewing it, comes out of the way. What is the sash like? The sash is nothing mustard. It is not like a same thing that has stripes. It is not even more hurt than that. It has a little top.
Gertrude Stein is like an outsider artist inside modernism. She makes obsessive, relentless, repeated, and repetitive works. With both and affable intransigence, Stein uses language semi-semantically, some definable meaning sometimes emerges, and semi-semiotically, playing intensely with pulsion and bodily mental sing-songs, rhyming rhythms and repetitions. She writes a text of bliss in Roland Barthes' terms and is a great illustration that such a text is frustrating, precisely as he says, in its suspension of finish and its constant multi-directional arousals. Stein has a slightly comic, slightly naive sound, a knowing, innocent sound, which she carries through with shameless shameless panache. Oh my God. Let's try that again. Shameless panache and a magisterial largesse. At the same time, her stances can be startling and paradigm shifting, particularly when they implicate literature, genre, gender, and the nature of language. The best way to remember Tender Buttons is only to memorize it. Otherwise, one forgets the whole. Is there a whole? And remembers only some of its more striking aphorisms. Roast potatoes 4. The difference is spreading. Rub her coke. A white hunter is nearly crazy. Act so there is no use in the center. From a variety. And one also remembers rhythms, the invention of cadences in language etudes as astonishing as Chopin. Like, out of kindness comes redness, and out of rudeness comes rapid same question. Out of an eye comes research. Out of selection comes painful cattle. Research, huh? Stein was always doing research in language. She was a rogue brain scientist doing research in linguistics and consciousness, an oppositional alchemist changing gold to syntactic particles. Not only did she cover almost every genre she could lay her hands on with her research in literary modes, but her research also took syntax as a central concern, research on nouns, research on homophonic slides and translingual puns, like in my piece, book to back and back again to bank care, or pun in French, bancaire, or soap to sew, or be papered for be prepared. She does research on phatic communication, on pronouns and reference and deixis, that's not what you think it means, on adverbs, or on binding phrases you don't notice, syntactic glue like, it does not so, or really then, it is a remark that joins. In Tender Buttons, Stein also does research on diction, gender, and writing. She appropriates the rhetorical cadences of women's fashion, recipe, and advice magazines, dresses and accessories, umbrellas, materials like feather, cotton, eyelet, lace. The pleasures of appreciating and adorning all recur. The work evokes bodily patterns, orality, food and sound, anality, cleanliness, regularity, and that was in your piece, containing and releasing, mainly in sentence rhythms, but also in some words. And sexuality, I don't think I have to prove that anymore, thanks to Leanne. In verbal allusions, codes, and puns. Please butter all the beefsteak is just one of many images combining vulval and culinary interests. Yet if Tender Buttons appears to be a feminine or femme text, still some sentence tones use syntactic cues that mimic other rhythms of conviction, postulates and definitions, masculine in cultural stereotype. I mean such categorical statements, and this is from all over, as, it is so rudimentary to be analyzed, or this is not tardy, or it is surely cohesive, and sometimes rhetorical condescension. A table means, does it not, my dear? It means. Stein deploys forensic rhythms of argument. If the persecution is so outrageous that nothing is solemn, is there any occasion for persuasion? Adding these gender-evocative rhetorical modes together, here in my piece, a man and earrings, and not so much a happy moment. Let's conclude that this is an androgynous or queer text by virtue of the charming instability and incessant looping between masculine and feminine styles, although the feminine does predominate and is lovingly valued. Tender Buttons emerges from a third place. It is écriture polysexuelle. In Stein in general, writing is perverse. Perverse writing means plurifilled, exorbitant, so stuffed with conflicting plethoras of time, place, characters, genres, everything on overload, so that prioritizing, establishing a sense of hierarchy of materials is impossible. There's no before or after, just the sensation of word pleasure or frustration in a loosely bounded field. So I thought, in the spirit of Stein's perversity, I wanted to take a section that I never remember is in Tender Buttons. And one that I never remember at all is a book. That's amazing because this is a book. And as Mallarmé proposed about a way different book, a book that may or may not exist, tout au monde existe pour aboutir à un livre, that is, the whole world or everything in the world exists to end up in a book or to end in a book. Well, Tender Buttons is one of those books that the whole world exists to end up in. And here we are, 100 years later, still ending up in it. Okay. Book. Book was there. It was there. Book was there. Stop it. Stop it. It was a cleaner, a wet cleaner, and it was not where it was wet. It was not high. It was directly placed back. Not back again, back. It was returned. It was needless. It put a bank when, a bank care. Suppose a man, a realistic expression of resolute reliability, suggests pleasing itself white, all white and no head. Does that mean soap? It does not so. It means kind wavers and a little chance to beside rest, a plane. Suppose earrings. That is one way to breed that. Oh, chance to say, oh, nice old pole, next best and nearer a pillar. Chest not valuable, be papered. Cover up the two with a little piece of string and hope rose and green. Please a plate, put a match to the seam, and really then it is a remark that joins many, many lead games. It is a sister and a flower and a dog and a colored sky, a sky colored gray, and nearly that, let.
Hi, everybody. Rachel Blau-Duplessis is the person who introduced me to Gertrude Stein, who was not on the modernist curriculum when I was an undergraduate, at least not Penn State in the 90s. So I was lucky for that. In 2005, it was on the Temple graduate curriculum, as well as Mina Loy and Lorene Niedecker, and it's great to know those poets and be able to read them. So I don't have any remarks prepared, but I was talking to Julia recently about Stein, and I remembered a ritual I used to have when I prepared to write. I would read Tender Buttons for a little while, 10, 15 minutes, to kind of warm myself up and break myself out of my daily fixations and familiarities of perception. So I would do this because it would give me a sense of possibility or a sense of fluidity in language and a sense of fluidity in things. So I'd read Tender Buttons for, say, 15, 20 minutes, and then I'd look up at the objects in the room, if I was in a room, and I would look at, say, a chair, and I'd have that wonderful little divorce between the object and the word we have for the object. And as you may know, it can be a wonderful thing to look at an object and call it what it is not, and begin from there. So I'd look, you'd look at a thing and you'd have a sense of the potential for that object to change form, to change substance, to transform, or to be animated. And that was a very good ritual, and I should get back to it. I'm gonna read a piano, and then a sound, and then a table, and then shoes. A piano, If the speed is open, if the color is careless, if the selection of a strong scent is not awkward, if the button holder is held by all the waving color and there is no color, not any color, if there is no dirt in a pin and there can be none scarcely, if there is not, then the place is the same as upstanding. This is no dark custom, and it even is not acted in any such a way that a restraint is not spread. That is spread. It shuts and it lifts, and awkwardly, not awkwardly, the center is in standing. A sound. Elephant beaten with candy and little pops and chews all bolts and reckless, reckless rats. This is this. It's good. I'll just read that again. Elephant beaten with candy and little pops and chews all bolts and reckless, reckless rats. This is this. A table. A table means, does it not, my dear? I'll start again. A table means, does it not, my dear? It means a whole steadiness. It is likely that a change. A table means more than a glass, even a looking glass is tall. A table means necessary places and a revision of a little thing. It means, it does mean that there has been a stand where it did shake. Shoes. To be a wall with a damper, a stream of pounding way, and nearly enough choice makes a steady midnight. It is pus. A shallow hole rose on red, a shallow hole in and in. This makes ale less. It shows shine. That's it.
Thanks. All right. First, I just wanted to thank Lainey and Julia for inviting me to participate in this great event, and with all these other wonderful poets. I'm going to jump sort of right to the end, actually, for the moment. And originally thinking about what I wanted to read and talk about here, I was drawn to the final pages of the book. And at first, was fixed on the final image, actually, in Tender Buttons, of this magnificent asparagus, and also a fountain. Because the image recalled to me the first time I saw a field of asparagus in late season, of asparagus that had gone to seed, and how they were and could be called magnificent, having shot up from the tiny, tender stalks we're used to seeing at the supermarket into these ebullient 3-foot-high bushes. Have you ever seen asparagus gone to seed? Right. So, and recognizing this, at least for myself at that moment in time, I had thought that my knowledge of the life cycle of asparagus was somewhat specialized, right? That I wouldn't have made that connection unless I had been spending a lot of time on farms, working as a land surveyor, and talking to farmers, asking them questions about things they were growing. So while the image itself is rooted in what one might call plain fact, or what actually is, if one weren't privy to that knowledge of what an asparagus does to reproduce, it would be tempting to read Stein's final image as being merely whimsical, when in reality it is a rather acute observation tied directly to the natural world, spoken aslant. I highlight this because I think as I continue to spend more time with Tender Buttons, I find myself having more moments like this one, in which what's being said makes perfect sense, though the getting there may feel a bit like walking down a garden path. I won't draw out the comparison that long, but this did make me think actually of Harriet Monroe's 1926 letter to Hart Crane in response to his poem At Melville's Tomb, in which she accuses him and his poem of opacity, of difficulty, and of being ultimately nonsensical. After which, in Crane's kind of breathtaking reply, he unpacks each metaphor and image. He shows each metaphor and image in the poem and shows exactly how succinct his observations are and how closely his words signal the phenomenal world. a final note on this magnificent asparagus, at least in my own reading. It was also a moment where I recognized, I mean, obviously the sexual underpinnings of the entire book recognized in this asparagus sort of blooming into seed and this sort of final orgasmic image, making it at least one of two major modernist texts that end thusly, the other being Joyce's Ulysses. All right, from the end of Rooms. Surprise. The only surprise has no occasion. It is an ingredient in the section. The whole section is one season. A pecking which is petting, and no worse than in the same morning, is not the only way to be continuous often. A light and the moon, the only light is on Sunday. What was the sensible decision? The sensible decision was that notwithstanding many declarations and more music, notwithstanding the choice and a torch and a collection, notwithstanding the celebrating hat and a vacation and even more noise than cutting, notwithstanding Europe and Asia and being overbearing, notwithstanding an elephant and a strict occasion, not even withstanding more cultivation and some seasoning, not even with not drowning and with the ocean being encircling, not even with more likeness in any cloud, not even with terrific sacrifice of pedestrianism and a special resolution, not even more likely to be pleasing. The care with which the rain is wrong, and the green is wrong, and the white is wrong. The care with which there is a chair and plenty of breathing. The care with which there is incredible justice and likeness. All this makes a magnificent asparagus in a fountain. Thanks.
Hi, y'all. It's so good to see such wonderful friends and new friends gathered here to celebrate Stein. 100 years of buttons, it's kind of amazing. I think I might have had the shortest selection. I only opted to read one sentence. I have more to say about it, though. So my sentence comes from Rooms. Starlight. What is starlight? Starlight is a little light that is not always mentioned with the sun. It is mentioned with the moon, and the sun it is mixed up with the rest of the time. I wanted to preface my comments with a short epigraph from Gaston Bachelard's The Poetics of Space, which I felt very much resonates with Tender Buttons' project. Space that has been seized upon by the imagination cannot remain indifferent space, subject to the measures and estimates of the surveyor. It has been lived in, not in its positivity, but with all the partiality of the imagination. Particularly, it nearly always exercises an attraction, for it concentrates being within limits that protect. Published nearly half a century before Bachelard's study of inhabited space, Stein rendered a vigorous statement on spatial poetics in Tender Buttons. In it, she reminds us that to dwell in a place requires and engages our intelligence. To live in and occupy a space is already a kind of knowing. And delightfully, though Stein's knowing occurs on site, it both accomplishes and trespasses against what the space may contain. A space is on occasion as an activity, not merely nouns. It invites our authorship as we convene. In Rooms, she announces her foray into the spatiality that starts, act so that there is no use in a center, a wide action is not a width. These abstractions indicate her philosophical examination of what constitutes rooms to us. They emerge as a broad, sparkling array. Her attention alights seamlessly from content to commentary to meta-commentary, and with delight. Her reorientations may prove disorienting for those expecting or desirous of more traditional mappings rendered in what we otherwise call description, but by inviting us to imagine rooms as an intelligent activity, and by modeling this engagement for us, Stein transforms them into intimate ecologies, populated, vertiginous, arcing presences that speak with her and with their own names. My favorite moment in Rooms is nested in her discussion of windows. She wonders at them, and we can track how her attention moves from the window itself to the curtain clothing it, to the voices and street sounds and light that pour through, hence my sentence on starlight. I'll read it again. It's so good. So starlight, what is starlight? Starlight is a little light that is not always mentioned with the sun. It is mentioned with the moon and the sun. It is mixed up with the rest of the time. This particular sentence resonates quite strongly with me from a personal standpoint, since I have been increasingly invested in trying to accomplish a solar intelligence within my body. Starlight and sunlight are of the same, and yet we forget this because of its dark inhabitants. Starlight is indeed mixed up with the sun the rest of the time. It is always speaking into us, and yet we rarely note or make mention of this fact. The distinction between starlight and sunlight is a question of time and perception, which she renders so beautifully in the following two sentences. Why is the name changed? The name is changed because in the little space there is a tree, in some space there are no trees, in every space there is a hint of more. All this causes the decision. If I open myself to the light that is constant, while noting the inconstancy and fleetness of my perception, I believe I may begin to sharpen and see the world anew. It perhaps requires me to relinquish some commonplace assumptions. I must act so there is no use in a center. Thank you all so much.
So this is the Tender Buttons section of an encyclopedia article that I wrote on Stein last year for the History of Modernist Poetry, which Cambridge University Press is going to publish next year. And it's edited by Alex Davis and Lee M. Jenkins. Although Three Lives and The Making of Americans were radical innovations, and these were the previous major works of Stein, neither was as revolutionary as Tender Buttons, begun, as you've heard a number of times, in 1912 and published in 1914. The 2014 City Lights edition, which is here, has some significant changes in the presentation of the work based on a review of the original manuscripts. The most important is actually the way that the titles appear, so that the relation of the titles to the work changes. References, there are about 15,000 words in Tender Buttons, which is in prose format, though it's not a prose poem as that term has been previously defined. This is about 5 times the length of T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, the most canonical American long poem of the era. Tender Buttons is the touchstone work of radical modernist poetry, the fullest realization of the turn to language, and the most perfect realization of wordness, where word and object merge. No work from Europe or the Americas had gone so far in creating a work of textual autonomy, where the words do not represent something outside of the context in which they are performed, and where the meanings are made in and through composition and arrangement. The sections of the work are not about subjects that are discussed, but are their own discrete word objects, verbal constellations. Meaning in these works is not something to be extracted or deciphered, but rather to be responded to, so that the reader's associations create a cascading perceptual experience, guided by the uncanny arrangement of the words. The more readers can associate with the multiple vectors of each word or phrase meanings, the more fully they can feast on the unfolding semantic banquet of the work. The key is not to puzzle it out, but to let the figurative plenitude of each work play out. For indeed, this work is not invested in predetermining structure or in precluding or abstracting meaning. Tender Buttons does not resist figuration, but entices it. And the work is rife with linguistic and philosophical investigation, as well as an uncannily acute self-awareness of its own process. Consider the title, which has many associations that bear direct relation to Stein's poetics. Buttons are used to fasten, attach, or join discrete pieces of fabric. This suggests a compositional practice akin to quilting and collage, and situates the work not only as a form of practical art or craft, suggesting a connection to what has often been considered and denigrated as women's work. Buttons are often ornamental or decorative. The sense of domestic space is also suggested by the section titles. Rooms and food suggested only because the association is loose. You press buttons. The operating system here is point and click in a touch-sensitive textual environment. A button is also a small protuberance, stub or knob or bud, its etymological root. Tender buttons suggest nipples or clitorises. The poetics is decentered eroticism, meaning disseminated evenly over the body of the text, not cathected onto nouns or plot, which is to say the work is averse to phallic or climax-oriented satisfaction. Tender Buttons, while not a manifesto, advocates a poetics of acting, quote, so that there is no use in a center, unquote, where the difference is spreading. Tender, like the poem, is gently caressing, fragile, soft, rather than rigid or hard, edible, tender food, effeminate, weak or delicate. But tender also means money, something offered in exchange for something else, as in legal tender. Tender appears 10 times in the work, always suggesting tenderness. But also note, quote, a transfer is not neglected, unquote. While I don't think the 10 tender was planned, the modus operandi of the works potentiate such serendipitous collusions. In the semiotic economy of the poem, words are tender, and the poem is fundamentally involved with language as a system of exchange rather than pointing word to object. Yet Stein's work is not random, but intended. As she says, no mistake is intended, even if she is, quote, mischief intender, unquote. And Stein's approach to composition is to be less controlling of language than its tender. Now let's segue to the first part of the first section of the three-part work, already read, a carafe that is a blind glass, a kind in glass and a cousin, a spectacle of nothing strange, a single hurt color, and an arrangement in a system of pointing. All this and not ordinary, not unordered, in not resembling. The difference is spreading. So that's the famous opening section. This poem addresses the relation of word and object. The first section of Tender Buttons is called Objects, or perhaps better to say, signifier and signified. It brings to mind Ferdinand de Saussure's suggestion in his contemporaneous Cours linguistique générale, 1906 to 1911, that language works by creating a system of difference, of one sound to another. Difference also suggests sexual or gender difference. In trying to break down the difference between signifiers and signifieds, Stein lets words be themselves, stand for nothing but what they are. Stein says the difference is spreading. On the one hand, this suggests the difference is proliferating. On the other hand, it suggests a way to see signifier and signified fused or melted onto one plane when we spread words instead of using words in a system of pointing. Think of painting with words, or think in painting again, the breaking down the foreground and the background of perspective to get the radical flattening of some abstract painting. That is, all surface, no depth. So, says Stein, this approach is not random or chaotic or meaningless because it doesn't point or doesn't use resemblance, not unordered in not resembling. Not unordered, but rather ordered differently. The poem then might be seen as a carafe, a transparent glass container, one view of what language is. That is a blind glass, one that you don't see through because it is filled with something dark. So it takes possession of itself. Now, circle back to the double meaning of spectacle, eyeglasses, and something one looks at from a distance, something one is separated from, as by a glass, or even the frame of a stage, a spectacle. But imagine if we could melt the difference between us and a world we look at as spectacle. Imagine if we could avert looking at our words as glasses that project distance, that separate us from the world. How can we break down this difference, this separation? How can we turn objects? How can we turn words into tender buttons? This is not what the poem means. This is not a paraphrase, but it sketches a set of investments that run through the full work. Those investments come in the form of a constellation of repeated words. Stein's approach is both derangement and rearrangement. There was an occupation, she writes at the beginning of Rooms. Reading this work presents a necessary challenge to thematic close reading, which won't work, while still requiring close scrutiny through an associational ambient reading of linguistic prompts and an allegorical reading of form. Think about what the form means allegorically. All the keywords in Tender Buttons are repeated numerous times, but the repetition is distributed throughout the work, making much of the poem less rhythmically repetitive and more abstract than other Stein works. Among the most frequently used words after articles and conjunctions are such words as to be, as is. That's 1,017 times, almost 7% of the words used. Now contrast this use of to be or is with the amount of use of this word in The Wasteland. In The Wasteland, it's only 2%, less than 2% of the words. Moreover, none of the keywords from Tender Buttons occur with any frequency, if at all, in Eliot's poems. It's a complete different vocabulary, including around the most basic verb, to be as is, followed by the very high frequency of be, are, and being, in keeping with Stein's approach to the continuous present, as well as was. Other frequently used words include little, 90 times, means, 44, strange, 25, as well as makes, shows, color, white, whole, change, single, same, suppose, and nothing. The word difference appears 13 times in the work. That word plus differ and different occur 24 times. Center occurs 22 times. Come or coming or comes makes 35 shows, as in the specifically erotic cuddling comes in continuing a change, but also the truth has come and keeps coming. Resemblance and arrangement each come into the text about a dozen times. In Roast Beef, the opening section of Food, the second part of Tender Buttons, Stein briefly returns to the rhythmic repetition through the use of gerunds that create a palpable sense of continuous present. This passage is the most evocative and enthralling of the work. In the inside, there is sleeping. In the outside, there is reddening. In the morning, there is meaning. In the evening, there is feeling. In the evening, there is feeling. In feeling, anything is resting. In feeling, anything is mounting. In feeling, there is resignation. In feeling, there is recognition. In feeling, there is recurrence, and entirely mistaken, there is pinching. All the standards have streamers, and all the curtains have bed linen, and all the yellow has discrimination, and all the circle has circling. This makes sand. If Emerson saw meaning as inflected by mood, and here's my quote from Emerson Experience, life is a train of moods, like a string of beads, and we pass through them. They prove to be many colored lenses, which paint the world their own hue, and each shows only what lies in focus. If Emerson saw meaning as inflected by mood, Stein brings it into a dynamically diurnal intimacy with the feeling of time passing from morning to evening, as well as the movements of meaning through the change of resting, mounting, resignation, recognition, and recurrence. We are pinched awake by recognizing these conditions and by recognizing a view from outside ourselves and inside ourselves. Indeed, it is this torquing of outside and inside that marks language's semiotic play. Here, not here. Words shift in use so that our norms and standards can take flight in exception, and our lives can be grounded as grains of sand. The tender of our language is change and exchange. From roast beef, all the time that there is use, there is use. And any time there is a surface, there is a surface. And every time there is an exception, there is an exception. Every time there is a division, there is a dividing. Tender and changing and external and central and surround and singular and simple and the same, and the surface and the circle and the shine and the sucker. In Tender Buttons, Stein was engaged in making a dialogic poetic of non-resemblance. Words not dominating the world with their order, but allowing the world to inhabit the words. Tender Button marks a decisive break with a voyeuristic poetics of subject and object, looker and looked at, figure and ground. It elides perspectival distance in favor of intimacy, non-gold-oriented erotics, and gustation.
Just want to say thank you again to Lainey Brown for that amazing introduction. And thank you again to all of our readers, Leanne Brown, Angela Carr, Rachel Blau-Duplessis, Ryan Eckes, Jason Mitchell, Juliet Lee, and Charles Bernstein. Please join us for a reception.